Black Rock Center.
Black Rock Center for the Arts. You booked the joint? Come
I
on,
know,
man.
it's so funny. I can't even remember.
Should I move back? Because my head's cut off on this one.
Okay, how's that? You looking good?
Well, I'll just see.
Yeah, I think
you want to
that's
see
great.
all of me? Yeah.
I think that's great. Okay, so let's get this party started. So first of all, I just want to thank you for sitting down with us today. We are Silke Endress, Lifestyle of a Lady CEO, International Women's Media Forum. We believe that everyone has a story. We like to know your story of glory. Our whole premise is creating a world without borders and connecting women and men to power. And so today we're here to talk about domestic violence and the impact it has on our communities, on our families, and the economic impact as well. And so I'm going to start with each and every one with each of you to have you introduce yourselves.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to start with you.
Hi, I'm Leon.
We're like, okay.
Can you elaborate?
Oh, hi. I'm Leon, actor, singer, star of some of the movies that you love, and lead singer of Leon and the Peoples.
Okay, awesome.
Oh my God. Hi, I'm Pam Price, CEO, founder of Life Ministry Foundation.
Okay, and of course I'm CC Cole, editor, CEO of Silke Endress. And so we're going to get started. Pam, I want to get started with you because I want to really talk about this great organization that you have, the nonprofit. So why don't you tell us about the nonprofit and why did you decide to start this nonprofit?
Okay, so Life Ministry Foundation, it was created to help families that are in need of help, taken from pieces of my life, and it allows me to really look at the need of single families, or not even just single families, but families who definitely are need help with keeping clothes on, the lights turned on, food in the house, things like that. The domestic violence piece is taken from my best friend. And so that piece was created so we can help others, since I was not able to help my best friend.
Mm-hmm. So I understand that she was your friend for a long time and you knew that
Years.
there was something wrong with her, but
Right.
you couldn't quite put your finger on it, that she was being abused, but she didn't really know how to tell you, and
Right.
you were her best friend.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, back then it was such a taboo conversation. You just didn't know. People are ashamed to discuss that. You know, that your husband is hurting you, or your children, or your wife, because we can't forget the men are going through that situation. The one time that she did come to me, she was in a really bad place, and we had to turn her away. You know, because we can't bring that into our household, because we
Right.
had to think about
Your children, your
yeah,
home.
my home.
Right.
Yeah. So
And
it
at
was
the
very
time, we
hard.
really didn't have enough information
You
about
didn't know.
domestic violence.
You didn't know, because it was like what goes on in the house stays in the house.
Right, right, right.
Mhm. Yeah.
And unfortunately, here we are 30 years later. and we're
30
still
years
in the same
later.
place, aren't we?
Yeah. Still.
Yeah. So Leon, tell us, I want to thank you once again for just being here. I love to see men who are involved in helping us eradicate domestic violence across all platforms. I am a global spokesperson for to end violence against all women. I try to lobby Congress at various and other municipalities, from local, state to federal, and impacting policy and legislation to help us to implement policies, rule of law, to stop domestic violence, and actually to put stiffer laws in place. Because right now, the way it works is that a woman will go to courts to get what they call a peace order for protection against a male counterpart. And it's taken for granted because it's just a piece of paper that says stay away. And oftentimes they put the woman in more danger, and then we read about her getting killed by her partner.
No, I mean, it happens far too often, and the impact on our community is so great that we don't even realize it, because it's passed on from generation to generation. When someone in the family is abused, the children see it, they grow up thinking that that's what a relationship is, and they continue the same cycle. So it's sad. Something you touched on earlier about what stays in the house, what happens in the house stays in the house. That's very much a part of our culture as Black people. And oftentimes you can have a friend or someone that you care about and see that they're being abused. They may even come to you and confide in you. But as soon as you make that jump to try to help them or, get them some kind of help, you're doing something coming in between a relationship, and so you find yourself on the outs.
Right.
Because all of a sudden, the man finds out, or the woman finds out, whoever, and they're like, oh, no, they need to stay out of our business.
Right.
And next thing you know, that you've been ostracized for trying to help your friend.
That's right, too.
And it's a very dangerous situation. But one thing I want to touch on as well is that, I know that you advocate very strongly, and I commend you for that, because it's something that needs to be done, and the statistics are incredibly high. But one of the things that aren't talked about as much is domestic violence on men.
Right.
And that is very prevalent, and you talk about it not being talked about. It's because so many men are embarrassed to even talk about the fact that their mate or anyone is putting their hands on them on a regular basis.
Right.
Or even more hurtful is verbal abuse. And that is so deep, because that touches someone's self-esteem, who they are on a daily basis. And it's almost more lasting in a person than actual physical contact.
Right.
Because you could get away from that domestic violence, you can get away from that person who's putting their hands on you, but the things that they've said to you, those things are embedded in you. And it takes you a while to get through that.
It goes back to when we were a kid, we used to say, and I realize now there's no doubt that it's a lie, sticks and stones may break my bones, words will never harm me. That is a lie from the pit of hell. I've learned that's a lie, because there are some things that people said to me that even though I don't care to be in their presence anymore and I can forget about them, those words are impactful. And they're on replay in your mind sometimes. Sometimes one thing can trigger.
But the thing is, it's not almost about words hurting you, it's who says them.
Right.
That's what matters. If you deal with someone out on the street or your friend, he says some hurtful thing, you're like, okay, they're out of my life.
Right.
But when it's your
loved one,
the person you live with, the person you care about, or even your parents or anyone, these are things you can't escape.
Because it's layered. You're supposed to love me. You're my relative. You gave birth to me. You made love to me. You married me. It's layered.
And if you feel that they do love you and that they do care about you, then those words really hurt you, because well, maybe what they're saying to me is the truth. So, and this, what I'm saying?
I thought about that.
Right, exactly. And so you're feeling this way about yourself, because the person that loves you, or you think loves you the most, is telling you these hurtful things.
Right. You touched on something that's, and I hate to say this, I had a Facebook, I'm not even going to call it fight, and I usually ignore Facebook comments, but then again, sometimes I figure when it comes down to issues that I'm really, really passionate about, I kind of try to make a point, because there are a lot of idiotic people that make stupid comments. It was a conversation about, oh, he shouldn't have done that to her. I'm like, you know what? As an advocate for women to eradicate violence, I have to admit that sometimes women can be as abusive as men.
Absolutely.
When I made that statement, my God, I had 1,000 people chop my head off on Facebook. But what they don't understand is that as women can be spiteful, we can be mischievous. I mean, we can do a lot of things to try to emasculate a man. That's a form of violence as well, because men do it to women. It's verbal abuse. It's emotional abuse. It's mental abuse.
And it's also physical as well.
Yeah.
There are a lot of battered men out there who are ashamed to tell anyone that.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm glad that you also point that out, because as advocates, we cannot forget there's always two equations.
Right.
And I fight for gender equality all the time, and it's like, we have to bring men to the table if we want to talk about gender equality, and we also have to bring men to the table to talk about domestic violence, because they're also victims as well.
Right.
And I say that men are ashamed to talk about being battered, but it's not just shame, it's actually legal, because I can tell you right now, if there's a fight in the house, the neighbor calls the police, they
First
come
thing
over
they
to
do
the
is go
house.
to the man.
Oh, the man's leaving the handcuffs.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether he was the one or not. A man knows that. He knows. One of the reasons why a man sometimes, I've been in situations where a woman tries to be violent like that, and you just like, whatever you do, you always put your hands behind your back.
Right,
because you know if you get into it, you go.
That's it.
Right,
Yeah.
Okay? Because that's just the assumption that's being made.
And women know that.
And not only do women know that, you have to realize when I talk about that cycle, okay, Well, whether it be a young boy or a young girl sees this example of what they think is love in the household, which includes domestic violence, they grow up to be the same way. And lots of times, a young girl will trigger a man to put his hands on her because that's what he saw as love in the house when she was growing up.
I'm so glad you're being honest about that. I mean,
Oh no, I've seen it. I've seen it many times. You know, kids that come from homes where there's domestic violence, they almost, trigger it amongst one another. You know, I mean, it's like you can see a girl just basically begging for her man to put his hands on her. And saying things that will push those buttons to do that because she saw that in her household growing up. And that's why that cycle has to be broken, you know? I always say, I have a friend going through a divorce right now. And even in my situation where I was together with the mother of my child, but we made sure that when we weren't seeing eye to eye on things, we made sure we made that separation before she saw us ever not be cordial or just loving towards each other, because I didn't want her to ever see that.
That's right.
And I think what happens is that nowadays we have parents out there who really are not parenting their kids the right way because they're selfish. Because once you have a child, you need to be selfless.
Right.
And whatever's going on with you need to protect your child's ears and eyes from the things that they don't need to see.
That's right.
Okay, and you can't sit there and just do anything in front of your child and expect that your child is not going to mimic you, because your child wants to grow up like you before he or she even realizes that.
Absolutely.
Because also you think about, and just to segue off of what Leon was saying, is that if your child sees that daddy is no good, daddy's this, so next time they go with daddy, then they're going to treat their parent the same way that mom has instilled in them to treat the dad.
Right.
So they're going to back talk, they're going to talk about the dad being, no good, no this, and so it's a two-way abusive relationship.
There was a young lady that was, how they bring them on TV, I don't know what to do with my son, he's 9 years old, and he slapped me. Like, I'm thinking, if my 9-year-old slapped me, it'll be a hole drilled into my floor because I'll be pounding him right through he's 9 years old.
That wasn't a black woman.
No, it wasn't.
I know.
Absolutely not.
I know that was not a black woman.
But when they drilled down to his problem, he's like, I don't see what the big deal is. Daddy do that to you all the time.
Boom.
Yeah.
And so his father has instilled in him and the mother that it's okay to slap a woman when she doesn't give you what you want, doesn't respond to you the way you expect her to.
Exactly.
Slap her. And that's his mother. We have to take some actions in a household. We have to find a way to get to men and boys to let them know there's a way out.
Right.
There's a way out. What is your connection to domestic violence, Leon?
Well, my connection to domestic violence is just like anyone else. I've seen so many people in my life be victims of it. I've seen it in my own family, and for whatever reasons, whether it was for alcoholism or whatever else that triggered it, it's something that's very close to me. And I don't think there's hardly anyone out there that hasn't experienced it either through themselves, their family, or someone that they know. And it's, for me, what's important is that we allow these people to be heard. We allow these people to be able to express themselves and to get out of this situation. And the most important thing, something I keep reiterating, is that we must try to stop that cycle.
Absolutely.
Because the cycle starts when they are young.
Absolutely.
Okay, and what they see. Okay, and if we can stop that cycle or do what we can to keep these kids from seeing these bad examples. Because I see it all the time. I see young boys, 13, 14, with their girlfriends. I've seen them pin them up against the wall in the park, slap them in front of their friends, do all this kind of stuff. And the young girl thinks that's okay because she sees that in her house.
Yeah. And they think it's some form of love.
Exactly. That's what they saw as love. They're not seeing, listen, let's be honest, they're not seeing their parents making love. What they see is their parents is arguing and putting their hands on one another. That's what they see.
Right.
So how can you expect for them not to mimic that?
I've noticed that you've never even played a role where you were abusive to a woman in your own acting career.
Well, that's not true.
Have you?
Yeah, I played the late great David Ruffin, who was extremely abusive to Tammy Terrell.
Okay.
Matter of fact, so abusive that
Was it
Otis,
verbally or physical?
No, it was physical.
physical
It was
and verbally,
physical.
yeah.
Mhm.
But so much so that Otis Williams, who the story was based on, was the only day he came to the set was when I was doing a scene with Tammy Terrell in the house.
Mm.
And he
Really?
saw one take, and he left. And he said it was so real to him he couldn't watch it anymore.
Wow.
You know,
That's
and
encouraging.
that scene wasn't even in the movie.
Okay. So,
Wow.
did I see it or didn't I see it?
You didn't see that
Oh,
scene.
okay.
You didn't see that scene.
Okay.
It was only the part where you guys were
you might
at
have
the
thought
park,
differently
right?
of me.
Right. It was
Interesting,
just-
because I didn't think I don't think I've ever seen you
yeah,
play a role
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
no,
When you, okay.
that wasn't in it. But and then also I played a role just a couple of years ago in a role in which I was so hesitant to take. I really didn't want to play this role at first, called Where Children Play, directed by Layla Johnson, who's a very talented director from Ghana.
Mm.
And it's a very sensitive relationship between a father who is dying and his daughter who has to come back to the house. She's left the house because she didn't want to see what was going on in the house anymore. And now because he's dying and the mother just died, she's forced to have to care for him while he's bedridden.
Mm.
Okay?
Mm.
And he saw her be abusive to not just her mother, but also to her half-sister.
Wow.
You know, and it was very
That's
rough
deep.
because now here you are have to change this man's sheets
Mhm.
and do all these other things, but he never. The thing is, she goes to find out that her sister wasn't his child, and she didn't know that at first, and he never ever touched her. He was always super kind to her because that was his only real daughter.
Mm.
You know?
Wow. Interesting.
You know, and that was one of the reasons why ultimately they talked me into doing it, because I love playing, you know, intricate relationships,
Mhm.
things that, because that's what life is.
Yeah.
Things are not black and white.
Right,
You know,
right.
you see people do things and you wonder why, but you don't understand the dynamics of their relationship.
Wow. What would you say to male perpetrators, young men? You know that they're a product of their environment. You know they've seen, you know, that type of abuse in their households. What would you say to them if you had an opportunity to speak to 100 youth, or even one, in terms of how to change the trajectory of their life?
Well, you know, I think when it comes to all these matters, it comes down to love. Okay? And the first love and most important love you have to have is self-love. And when you don't love yourself, that is the reason why you do the things that you do. Because if you care about who you are as a person, if you truly love yourself, okay, you're not going to allow yourself to be that kind of a man. Okay, so what I would say to any young man, anything, is please take a look at yourself in the mirror. Okay, think about who you are and the kind of man you want to be. Okay, and do that first and foremost. And I think if you really do that search within you, you'll find that place that you don't want to be that kind of person. And you may need to seek help, but you can't get help unless you seek it. Okay, so the first thing I'd say, you just need to look at that man in the mirror and see if that's someone that you want to be.
Mm.
Wow.
That's a word.
Now, Pam, you and I both know the statistics on domestic violence. One of the things I always thought about this, and I'm glad we talked about it early on, where in our communities we could talk about everything. We could talk about the health disparities. We can talk about the economic gap. We can talk about the educational gap. But we don't talk about domestic violence. Through your efforts with your foundation, and I know you're taking a different aspect on it, how do you feel that we can actually break this conversation into our families, something that's not too taboo or embarrassing to talk about, and particularly how do we get our churches involved to really start helping the community heal?
Well, now as far as the churches, what I've done, I've reached out to some of the local churches to begin, and I'm actually starting a couple of programs with some of the local churches to do and we don't want to call it a domestic violence roundtable. It's more like a women's session, because what we're finding, if you put that